Good morning to you all. Welcome to day two, round two. I'm so glad to see so many of you here from before, and I'm sure there's some new ones too. We have a great day, and continuing in our philosophy is starting out with extraordinarily great home run hitters. Yesterday, of course, with Patty Harris and Jeanette Sadakan. Today we have Kate Levin to begin the day in just a few moments, but let me call the House to order. And all of those who can hear my voice out there, come on in. While you are doing so, let me just remind you, if I may, that we have had wonderful support, not only from all of you here, but from a number of organizations, and I'm going to tell you them again because we owe so much to them. Rockefeller Foundation, the Rockefeller Brothers Fund, the Winston Foundation, Con Edison, Helaba Bank, who was here, of course, last night sponsoring the MAS Masterworks, which was a great evening. American Express, Tishman Speyer, the William and Mary Grieve Foundation, the Tiffany and Company Foundation, the Educational Foundation of America, and of course, with the wonderful support from our media sponsor for the summit, the New York Times. So with that, let me bring back the great impresario, Vin Cipolla, who has worked so tirelessly in creating this idea, and with his team, I think has just done a superb effort. Vin, come on out and start the day.
Thank you again, David, for that very nice introduction. I want to quickly take a moment to thank our board members, many of them here again this morning. Thank you for your great support, involvement, and your generosity. And thank you, too, to the totally amazing, committed, creative, and tireless MAS staff, especially Christine Krish, but everyone on the MAS staff, for all of your work on the tremendous amount of content for this summit, and to Dalzell Productions for pulling so many elements together in such a masterful way. Good morning, everyone. We've arrived here today using different modes of transportation. Many of us took the subway, and some of us took the bus, and some of you signed up to bike here from points to the south. Paul Steely White led our bikers up the West Side Highway from Battery Park, and thank you, Paul, for guiding people up to the summit. Pun intended. I want to point out to everyone, just in case you haven't been able to look at the whole space, that we have a wonderful sustainability cafe created by Great Performances to the west, with an MAS bookstore in the rear to the southwest. We also have MAS hats and umbrellas for sale back there. To the north, we have Betaville, Digital Media Central, led by our good friend Carl Skelton from the Brooklyn Experimental Media Center at Poly NYU. We have a gigantic ladies' room, I am told, to the north, and a onesie for the guys is up there. And then there's there's not a bad men's room over here, directly in front of me. And there's a green room behind the stage for speakers and for panelists. I'm excited to continue the spirited, informative, creative conversations that made our first day such a sizzling success. For those of you that were here yesterday, it was tremendous. Like yesterday, we expect to have a very rich and fluid day with a lot of activity. 560 people have registered for 400 seats, but folks are always coming and going, and it all works out great. And plus, the summit action continues on our website, and you can access video right at this moment at mas.org/summitnyc/videos. Yesterday, in my opening remarks, I talked about livability, a celebrated term here at MAS, and a concept really understood by New Yorkers. Some people don't equate urban life with livability. Yesterday, I called them losers, and today they are still losers. And they will lose in the end, because density, appropriate density, does mean sustainability as well as livability. It's worth repeating that in the vertical city Manhattan, we have the greatest residential density in the country. Manhattan's density is approximately 71,000 people per square mile. That's 800 times that of the nation as a whole, and more than 30 times that of Los Angeles. and look beyond the boroughs of New York City. During the last 20 years, we in the continental United States, the 48 states, consumed more than 16 million rural acres, that's 1 acre for every new household, to house our growing population, often along new roads with cul-de-sacs to nowhere, to developments cut off from any urban core, cut off from each other, cut off from shopping, and forget about community centers and real parks. By the year 2050, not that far away, 6 billion people, 2/3 of humanity, will be living in urban areas, though often defined as one city sprawl connecting with another. New York may be the country's most densely populated city, but it's also its most sustainable. We have the lowest level of automobile ownership and use, 23%, the smallest carbon footprints per capita, the highest percentage of people who walk to work, and the highest percentage of people using mass transit for commutation. On average, New Yorkers drive 9 miles per day versus the 26 miles a day the average American drives. Our review and discussion of the first MAS survey on livability in New York City, supported by the Rockefeller Foundation, revealed an awful lot, about the challenges in the road to enhancing livability in our neighborhoods, and I know today's discussions will deepen and expand our thinking. To get things moving, I am delighted to now introduce Ashton Hawkins, an advocate and leader in arts and culture in New York City and beyond. Ashton is of counsel to the law firm Gersten Savage and is a special consultant to Christie's. He is also a longtime member of the MAS Board of Directors. Throughout his tenure on the board, he has guided MAS on a number of strategic planning and development issues. Ashton has had a long career providing legal expertise to arts and culture endeavors that play a major role in making communities more livable. Specifically, he held a number of leadership roles at one of New York's most cherished art institutions, the Metropolitan Museum of Art. Moreover, he was the founder and co-chairman for 8 years of the annual Museum Law Conference and was a key force in the legislative initiative that led to the United States implementing UNESCO's Treaty on the International Movement of Art. Ashton can also add the title of author to his list of achievements. In 2005, he was deeply involved in the creation and publication of a book on art collection issues, Who Owns the Past, Cultural Policy, Cultural Property, and the Law. Today, Ashton is offering his experience and wisdom to a number of nonprofit boards in New York City, among which include the Alliance for the Arts, where he is chairman emeritus, the World Monuments Fund, and the New York Studio School. Please welcome a dear friend to MAS and a dear friend of mine, Ashton Hawkins.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Ashton Hawkins, as you've just heard, and I'm a member of the board of the Municipal Art Society. It is my pleasure and my honor to welcome Kate Levin, the keynote speaker, to launch Day 2 of the MAS Summit for New York City. She has served as Commissioner of Cultural Affairs for the City of New York since Mayor Bloomberg appointed her in 2002. As we heard from yesterday's excellent speakers, the theme of livability in New York includes a great many more aspects of daily life than many of us have been aware of. Commissioner Levin's multifaceted role involves, among other demanding responsibilities, keeping in touch with, advising, and giving technical support to over 1,400 nonprofit cultural institutions in all 5 boroughs. Almost every part of this city, with some exceptions, now presents cultural programming of one kind or another, which enliven, educate, and stimulate people's lives, and thereby contributes not only to the city's economy, but also to the city's livability. However, beyond the official description of her portfolio, you should also be aware that she has been our most vocal and most successful champion of public art, backed strongly by the Bloomberg administration. First, one unforgettable example is her advocacy for the gates in Central Park, which helped to propel a dream into a triumph and an enduring civic memory. And second, in very tough economic times, she has lobbied, advocated, fought, and argued for every dollar that could possibly be allocated to the cultural institutions, big and small. She is a true champion of the arts. Please welcome Commissioner Kate Levin.
Thank you so much, Ashton. And congratulations to Vin and to the board and staff of MAS for giving us this extraordinary opportunity to come together. Having been given the honor of speaking to you at the start of the second day of this convening, I thought a lot about how to relate my field, the nonprofit cultural community, to the themes advanced by previous speakers and the variety of ideas we eagerly anticipate from today's sessions. And then I realized that culture is, in fact, the most powerful single bellwether for the topic of livability. Now, I understand that sounds like a dire case of bureaucratic monomania. It's what we call in the biz when all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail-itis. But I genuinely think it's worthwhile exploring the issues that come into focus about the subject of this summit when looked at through the prism of nonprofit culture. Let me begin by pointing out something of a contradiction. The New York City Department of Cultural Affairs is the biggest single funder, public or private, of nonprofit culture in the United States. Our city's creative community is rivaled only by London and perhaps Paris. Under Mayor Bloomberg, even in deeply challenging economic times, the cultural sector has received more attention and support than ever before, to the point where several years ago, the New York Times, in a gratifyingly large headline, called us the Arts Administration. And yet, there is precious little that would be generally accepted as a policy rationale for this level of support, to the extent that policy references the ideas that major decisions, allocations, and regulatory structures can and should be determined according to a consistent set of priorities and objectives. In the case of culture, of course, the less regulation, the better. In terms of consistent objectives, there is universal agreement that the work needs to be good, and no agreement on what that actually means. Really, the only issue around which there is rock-solid consensus in the field is funding. There should be more of it. While the idea of a one-plank policy may be fetchingly minimalist, it doesn't actually create a lot of latitude for understanding which ideas are most productive and what objectives are most worthy to pursue. So how has our city created unprecedented opportunities for the arts to survive and even flourish when the sector itself is impervious to so many of the dynamics of civic support, like tax incentives, regulatory reform, or, again, policy? By way of some answers, I'd like to start with a selective history of my agency. Culture in the city of New York has been part of a public-private partnership since 1869, when a group of citizens came to the government with a deeply innovative deal. They would create a collection for public display if the city would build a building to house it. That compact gave birth to the American Museum of Natural History, and the Metropolitan Museum of Art followed along the same lines a year later. The land and buildings belong to the City of New York. The programming is created by private nonprofit corporations. The mid-Victorian moment in which these events took place is helpful in understanding the key impulses shaping these organizations. A decade earlier, in 1859, the City College of New York, cornerstone of what is now the City University of New York, was founded, quote, to educate the children of the whole people. The same democratizing principle comes ringing through the initial statement of purpose of the Metropolitan Museum, created to establish and maintain, quote, a museum and library of art, encouraging the application of arts to manufacture and practical life, advancing the general knowledge of kindred subjects, and, to that end, of furnishing popular instruction. This focus wasn't limited to the blocks around the newly created Central Park. For example, the Brooklyn Museum and the Brooklyn Botanic Garden are descendants of an entity originally called the Brooklyn Institute of Arts and Sciences. The city genetically engineered subsequent public-private partnerships across a range of disciplines, also creating zoos, performing arts centers, and historical societies. The next major moment in the city's relationship to culture began in the early 1960s. As the historic preservation movement developed momentum, pre-existing organizations were added to the city's portfolio. Carnegie Hall was bought at the last minute by the city to save it from demolition. Snug Harbor Cultural Center on Staten Island was on the first ever docket of buildings designated by the city's new Landmarks Commission. The Brooklyn Academy of Music, a victim of the economic slide that bedeviled that borough for decades, was purchased by the city. In the late 1960s, another important trend emerged. In an effort to quell the rising violence triggered by major social shifts, government dollars poured into summer programs. The most successful of these often had a strong cultural focus. Cultural entrepreneurs like Joe Papp were taking art to the people with galvanizing effect on both performers and audiences. In the early 1970s, yet another theme was introduced. In 1974, the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey published the first ever assessment of the economic impact of culture in the tri-state area, which it pegged at $4 billion. What seems obvious to us now was major news at the time. The city's cultural funding function, which had been housed in the Parks Department for over a decade, some of you probably remember the Department of Parks, Recreation, and Culture, was increasingly looking to fund arts programming not taking place on parkland. And now there was a strong economic rationale for government support for culture. So in 1976, the Department of Cultural Affairs was created as an independent city agency. You might say that it rose, Aphrodite-like, on the foam of economic analysis. But as I've tried to suggest, much of the buoyancy derived from a long and deep linkage between many powerful civic forces. Today, the city owns 33 cultural institutions and funds another 880 organizations in all disciplines across the 5 boroughs, from the Metropolitan Opera to the smallest startup dance company functioning out of its founder's bathroom. Our capital unit will spend $750 million over the next 4 years on new construction, renovations, and equipment. Currently, we are doing 320 projects at 190 organizations, from building new buildings to fixing old boilers. Yes, I am the queen of cultural plumbing. What I'm trying to underscore is my agency's history, is an idea of arts and culture as deeply embedded in this city's DNA. It's not just about specific disciplines, artists, or works, but about a long-term investment embracing everything from education and preservation to the environment and social activism. The caricature of culture may center on travertine marble palaces of high art in exclusive neighborhoods patronized only by the wealthy. But the reality is much, much different. Of the almost 900 organizations we fund, half of them have annual operating budgets of less than $250,000. Don't get me wrong, this city is blessed in having some of the largest, best endowed, most